Funding for Idaho Reports is provided by the Friends of 4, 10, and 12, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by a grant from the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation.
Good evening. In just a couple of weeks, Idaho public school students and their teachers will be headed back to the classroom again. And most of those teachers will return to jobs this school year with the most substantial salary increases that many of them have seen in a long time. The last session of the state legislature appropriated over $20 million as part of a major effort to narrow the gap between the national average for teacher pay and what Idaho public school teachers make. Before long, the legislature will again begin wrestling with the second stage of that effort, which includes several million more dollars for teacher salary equity, and to establish a career ladder system that will be designed to compensate the very best Idaho teachers. Tonight, with the director of the Idaho Education Association, with a teacher, with a superintendent, and with one of the legislative architects of the public school reform legislation, we'll examine how Idaho teachers have fared so far under that program and where things are going from here. We start tonight with one of the authors of the education reform proposal, Representative Lyndon Bateman, an Idaho Falls Republican who is also a public school teacher. Mr. Bateman is with us tonight in Pocatello. Mr. Bateman, a few months ago, back during the beginning of the process of public school negotiations, school boards and superintendents negotiating with their teachers, you were quoted as expressing some concerns about just how much of the money that the legislature appropriated for salary increases would actually wind up in the teachers' hands. Do you still have those concerns, or has it worked out the way the legislature envisioned it?
Well, Mark, we had a meeting of our joint Legislative Education Reform Committee Tuesday, and we got a report as to the progress of our reform legislation. And I was very pleased with that report. We took testimony from Jerry Evans, the Department of Education, from the Idaho Education Association, the school administrators, the School Boards Association, and from experts from University of Idaho. With regards to salaries, it's pretty hard to tell at this point just what the total increase will be, because we have quite a few districts which have not settled. They're still in the process of negotiations. But based on what I've heard, what I've seen firsthand, it appears that most of that money is indeed going to salaries. Some districts appear to have settled for around 13 or 14% basic overall average increase per teacher. So I'm very, very hopeful that things will develop and that most of that money will have indeed gone to salaries as intended.
That 13 or 14%, is that about where it ought to be in your view?
Somewhere there, yes. 14, would like to have seen more than that, but I think if it were 13 or 14%, we can be very well pleased, yes.
I think I'm right in that your district has settled, right? The district that you work in?
No, we haven't.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The district made an offer, a 13.2% offer, as I recall.
Okay.
So they appear to be closer to settlement.
What is salary the outstanding issue in your district still?
Seems to be. There's some fringe benefit problems. It isn't just salary, personal leave, just how that should be handled. But it appears to be the major issue.
I know it's sort of probably hard to gauge, but let me ask you anyway. What's your impression about how teachers have felt about this process so far, and about the salary increases that have been granted in the districts that have settled?
Well, I think teachers are basically pleased with the progress of the reform legislation. I know in my own district I've received several very favorable comments just recently. They would like to get more than 13.2%, but generally they're pleased. I see with regard to the career ladder, that seems to be developing along favorable lines. We have an advisory committee from the Department of Education working on that under the able leadership of Dr. Terrell Donick. and we have a task force. The IEA has a task force on the career ladder formulating proposals for the implementation of that part of the reform legislation. I see some very good response, very positive response coming from the education community on the various facets of the reform bill.
And again, just to repeat for emphasis finally, it appears to you at this point that the money that the legislature intended to go for salary increases for public school teachers has, for the most part, really gone in that.
Yeah, it appears to be going that direction.
Okay.
Generally.
We'll come back, sir. Thank you very much. Another view now from the Idaho Education Association, a group that represents many of the state's public school teachers, and a group that during the formulation of the public school reform package had several reservations about just how well this process would work out. Don Raleigh is the IEA's executive director. Mr. Raleigh is in Boise tonight. Mr. Raleigh, do you still have reservations about how well it's working out?
Yes, of course, we still have reservations because there are a lot of steps left to be taken. But we have to break the legislation down, I think, into several areas. The area that you asked Representative Bateman about most seems to be the salary area, the salary equity money.
Well, let's concentrate on that for just a moment. He said that he thought generally teachers were fairly satisfied with the kinds of increases that have been granted.
I think that's true up to a point. I believe there have been about 3 different kinds of responses, Mark. One has been from some districts who have treated the salary equity money just exactly as it was supposed to be treated, and that is salary equity money. In other words, salary that was to be used for catch-up money over and above what might normally be considered a normal increase. Insofar as districts were able to do that, many of the districts who settled relatively early did that, and so they provided some salary equity money in addition to salary increases coming out of general fund appropriation. That was tough to do because the general fund appropriation, as you recall, was not as high as it might have been because of the fact that there was a significant amount of money appropriated for salary equity. There's a second tier of school districts who tried very hard and for the most part succeeded in diverting the House Bill 475 salary equity money to salaries. Probably did not give any additional money in salary, but did divert all of 475's money to salary.
And 475 was the so-called
House Bill
public
475
school reform bill.
Right.
Okay.
And then there is a third tier of school districts who have not been able, apparently, to even take all of the House Bill 475 money and divert it to salaries. And some of those districts are still bargaining. We have a larger number of districts unsettled at this point on the issue of salary than is normal, and the reason for that essentially is the quarreling that's going on, and I don't mean that in a strident sense, but the quarreling that's going on over the use of the salary equity money in House Bill 475.
So in some cases, it would appear that the negotiating process and the settlement of salaries has been made easier because of this legislation in some districts, and in some districts it's been made more difficult.
Yes, to both questions, I believe. Probably more so to the easier. I believe that school districts, and I think my friend Mr. Deedy would bear that out, that in many districts negotiations, at least on the salary matters, were probably much easier this year as a result of 475.
Mr. Bateman said that 13 or 14% seem to satisfy teachers, and that seems to be, generally speaking, where many of these increases are coming down. Is that about right in terms of percentage?
Well, it's a little too early to tell that yet. That varies from district to district. There are a number of districts who have settled in that area. There are a handful that have settled above that area. There are some that are still quite a ways below that area, and that will vary from district to district. And of course, then the obvious question is 13 or 14% of what? There are some districts who have used the salary equity money, Mark, to raise salary schedules that were admittedly poor before to a more competitive state, and obviously that was the basic theory of the salary equity money to begin with.
Right. Let me just ask you finally, I understand there is some debate in some districts about how the money has been allocated among the teachers, not necessarily the percentage of increase, but whether most of it has gone to more senior teachers, whether it's been spread out across the board? Has that been a problem in some districts?
Not noticeable. That will always be a question, and that is obviously subject to local negotiations, as it usually is. But that has not been a noticeable problem, certainly not of any great magnitude.
We'll come back, sir. Thank you. As you've already heard, for many Idaho school district, negotiations with teachers have been easier this year than they have been in some time. Many districts, like the Caldwell School District in southwestern Idaho's Canyon County, completed salary talks fairly early and fairly easily. Darrell Deedy is the superintendent of the Caldwell schools. Is that a safe statement, to fairly early and fairly easily?
I don't think there's any question about it. Certainly in our school district, it was easier this year than many, many years.
Does that relate directly to this legislation we're talking about
Certainly
here?
does. The object of negotiations is primarily for fringe benefits and salaries for the employee group, the teachers. And when you have something to provide teachers in the way of an additional salary, it's certainly going to ease the process, and it did that.
What sort of percent were you able to give your teachers?
Actual new money, there was some movement of monies from one area to another, but new monies going to into the salary schedule was approximately 13%.
So that would be in the general framework of what we seem to be seeing in many
It's in
places.
the ballpark, that's correct.
And how was that allocated up and down between more senior teachers and newer teachers?
This was something I think we all recognized that we wanted that money to affect all categories, meaning the beginning teachers, as well as those that have been with the school district for a long time. In the Caldwell School District, the majority of our teachers have been with us 10 years or longer. And so if any particular group received a greater benefit than in the other group, it would be for those teachers that have been with us for a long time. However, our teachers also were willing to recognize that we have to be competitive in the marketplace to employ new teachers, and so we did get, I think, a significant increase on the front end of that schedule as well.
So what would a starting teacher in your district be making?
The starting salary, starting 1984-85, would be $13,000 and top at just a little over $24,000.
Okay. What about your relations with teachers? I assume that since you settled fairly early and fairly easily, that the relations with your teachers must be pretty good in terms of the salary question.
I think that over the years...
They're satisfied, I guess.
Well, obviously, we would like to be able to do more. And I think on the horizon, the legislative intent is to do more in the area of providing salary equity, to get Idaho teacher salaries up to the national average. I think the intent of the legislature is there. I think that as a school administrator, I certainly am going to go along with that. I think our teachers are looking optimistically for another year, that we can make some additional strides in the 1985-86 school year.
And finally, were you able to use this money from what's been called House Bill 475, the Public School Reform Bill? Did you use it for salaries exclusively?
As far as the intent of the legislature was salary equity for that particular monies, and yes, to the letter, we were able to do so.
Did you do that, though, at the expense of letting some other things go unattended that you would have liked to have dealt with?
I don't believe so. I think that was the priority item going into the negotiations process, that we were going to take our portion of that $20+ million and put it into salaries, into the teacher salaries. That was our priority. I'm sure it was the teachers' priority.
We'll come back, sir. Thank you. As you have already heard also, not everyone has had the similar experience of the Caldwell District. Several districts are still negotiating with teachers, and in some cases they remain far apart on a settlement. Wanda Roberts of Pocatello knows about one of those situations. Ms. Roberts is a teacher in the Pocatello School District and the president of the Pocatello Education Association, which is still negotiating a contract with the school board there. She joins us tonight in Pocatello. What are the questions that have to be settled in Pocatello?
Right at this point, what we are dealing with is a total package cost, and we are approximately $100,000 apart on that, or less than 1%.
How much does that relate that to something that was in the context of what we've been talking about here in terms of a percentage increase for teachers?
The board has offered us a 14% new monies package, all right? We have on the table at this particular point a total package cost of 14.9%. We're very close, and yet we're very far apart.
Okay, $100,000 doesn't sound like very much, but it seems like, if I read the newspapers correctly, it seems like you've been working on this for a long time and still are some distance apart.
Yes, we have, Mark. What has happened, in the wording of the House Bill 475, there were the words that all certificated personnel would receive this equity money. Our board took that into consideration, and they offered us 88% of House Bill 475 monies, so that they could also take care of administration, etc. At the initial meeting, that was the only amount of money that was offered. However, through the negotiation process and along summer, they have now come to 14%.
Are you going to be able to settle this, do you think, before you go back to school?
I would like to be an optimist. I would like to say yes, we are. At this particular point, we have gone through mediation twice. We are now at a point that we are meeting on Monday to discuss fact-finding and who we would mutually agree upon to serve as the fact-finder. However, things can change prior to that meeting.
Sure. Let me just make sure I understand this correctly. One of the points from your perspective is that the school board in Pocatello has not followed the letter of House Bill 475 in not granting all of that money to salary equity.
I couldn't agree with what you just said. What they've done is they have followed the wording of House Bill 475, which in that wording they said all certificated personnel, okay?
All right. And you're disagreeing, though, with their interpretation of that law?
No. You know, I can agree with those words. What we were saying, though, is if you're going to give us the 88% of that House Bill 475, then also give us a certain percentage of the additional general funds appropriation money.
I see. Okay. Well, how would you characterize tonight, as this process continues in Pocatello, the mood of the teachers that you represent, for example? Are they optimistic, discouraged? What's the mood?
If you are referring to how do they feel about what the legislature did, I feel that they feel good about it. It's rather sad that it's taken us this long to enjoy what the legislature did and appropriated, and taken us this long to move to where we are now. It would have been a lot nicer if we could have had that money right off the very beginning and started dealing with the general funds appropriations.
Okay, well, let me open this up. It seems to me, Mr. Bateman, that that's one of the criticisms that was made of the legislation that you helped write would be that it would create these kinds of problems between local school boards and their teachers.
Well, we expected some problems, of course. You still have the negotiations process, and as Wanda said, the disagreement seems to be over the monies outside of House Bill 475.
Right.
The money in the general fund appropriation. You're going to have, you know, as long as you have that negotiations process, you're going to have disagreements. But I think it's going smoothly, and I agree with Superintendent Deedy. He indicated it's gone more smoothly than in other previous years, and that seems to be my impression in many districts. And although there are some districts which have not finalized their negotiations, and of course that was the case last year also, as I recall, quite a number had not finalized at the beginning of the school year.
Do you see that the fact that Mr. Raleigh said a moment ago that there are more districts who have not settled now than there normally are this time of year, does that relate directly to some of the debate that surrounds this particular piece of legislation?
It might be. I haven't, to be frank with you, I haven't kept track of the number of districts that, or the negotiations process in the various districts. I really haven't. And Mr. Raleigh would have more information on that. Based on observations I've had generally, input from various superintendents and teachers, I think it appears, as Wanda said, teachers are generally pleased with what the legislature did. There's negotiations problems when you have that major kind of increase in the appropriation. There's going to be some negotiation. Both sides are are interested in the subject. You've got more money there, and the teachers are going to get it as much as they can, of course. And there again, I can't comment on the breakdown district by district.
Right.
as to
Mr.
what's
Raleigh, do you
happening.
have a comment on that?
Yeah, Mark, I must correct slightly the characterization that you made of what I said. I think I said that there are probably more districts now that have not settled at this time of year where the issue is salary
Okay.
than in past years. I believe that the remaining issue being salary is probably higher. The number of districts in which the remaining issue is salary is probably higher this year than in past years. I think we have something like 16 or 17 districts remaining unsettled. But I'm hopeful that they will all settle. I don't see any serious problems on the horizon. Hopefully that will be a prophetic statement. I really don't see any major problems. But the question of salary money versus salary equity money, House Bill 475 money in total versus a percentage, general fund money in addition to House Bill 475 money, that set of questions is essentially what the debate is about.
Right. Well, let me take you all in a slightly different area then. I believe I'm hearing relatively general consensus here that this process so far has, with obviously some negotiations still continuing in places like Pocatello, that it's worked pretty well. What happens now as we look ahead to the next session of the legislature with Mr. Bateman's committee hearing earlier this week that we might be facing already a $50 million shortfall considering the money that is predicated to further address this problem? Superintendent Deedy, how do you look ahead at this next session of the legislature?
Well, I'm sure it's going to be a difficult task in light of the current economic conditions unless there is a turnaround here. I'm sure there may be some problems unless we have a turnaround. However, I think the legislature has made a decision. There is an intent by the legislature, the recently adjourned legislature, towards the completion of House Bill 475, the second phase, if you will, that being the additional equity money for public educators. That would be one portion, and also funding a career ladder. I'm still optimistic about the next session. I think that they'll still be able to follow through with their commitment to public schools in Idaho in both counts, the salary equity and also being able to fund the career ladder. I'm excited about the opportunity that the career ladder offers. I think for too long, or let me put it this way, I think we need to be able to pay outstanding teachers an outstanding salary. And so far we have not been able to do this. Maybe this is the light at the end of the tunnel that we've been looking for a long time. But I would only say that is part of it. Certainly we've got to have the additional equity money to go along with that.
Mr. Raleigh, you said you were optimistic, but you also know the political realities of the Idaho legislature and how tight budgets can be.
Mm-hmm. I still have to remain optimistic, Mark. I believe that Lyndon Bateman's Education Reform Subcommittee will have a significant voice in determining whether or not being able to persuade the rest of the legislature that an unfinished task needs to be finished. I was present at that meeting when Representative Bateman and his colleagues heard the projection by the fiscal analyst. I think Senator Ney, Representative Bateman's co-chair of that committee, characterized it very well when he said, well, that's a problem. It's the same kind of problem we've dealt with before. We'll deal with it again. But he refused to allow a pessimistic view to creep into the committee's proceedings, and I'd like to take that view. I believe that the legislature is going to have to deal with that, obviously less than optimistic projection. But I also believe that at least the majority of the legislature has made a commitment to education reform and to salary equity in House Bill 475, and I believe that at this moment, at least, they're proceeding with that in good faith, and I prefer to remain optimistic.
Mr. Bateman, will it be a tough job to convince the next legislature to follow through with the second stage of this program?
Well, Mark, I remain optimistic also. But we must consider that there will probably be about a 40% turnover in the membership of the legislature in the coming session. You're going to have 21 totally new people on board as a result of reapportionment. And it will remain for those of us who have worked on this legislation to convince these new people to go with us and to remain and to support the additional funding levels and the other reforms contained in the bill. I think the career ladder system that's being developed is critical, I think, in this whole process. As I mentioned earlier, the Department of Education has an advisory committee now working on a career ladder, or the guidelines, the basic guidelines for a career ladder system. And Dr. Terrell Donick is the specialist hired by the department who has the task of leading this work.
I believe, excuse me, I believe I saw you quoted earlier this week as saying that how well that process worked of developing the guidelines and then how well the guidelines were adapted by the local districts would do a lot to say how well this process of appropriating the money would move along.
Absolutely. If we have some good guidelines coming out, and if the members of the legislature are convinced that indeed the career ladder, the evaluation system adopted will indeed reward good teachers, and if they're excited about it, if they see that it's going to work, and if they see action coming from the local districts in formulating plans, if there's a good positive response, I think the legislature will be willing to appropriate the money. And if they're not as impressed with the guidelines that are being developed and the local district efforts, then they'll be not as excited.
Right.
And I'm very, very positive at this point. The IEA has their task force working. We have some districts that are quite a ways down the road in developing a system. I would like to offer one word of caution, however.
Sure, and I want to get back to Mr. Roberts. So
some teachers that I've talked with kind of envision this thing as this career ladder as being a ladder that you climb up as you obtain more credit hours, that it should be largely based on years of experience or degrees held, and certainly those factors should not be left out. But I would hope that other factors would come into play as well, and that it should not be based on, for example, a master teacher having a master's degree.
Right.
Maybe a local district may want to have that requirement.
Ms. Roberts, let me just ask you finally, in just a short period of time left here, you've got Lyndon Bateman sitting right there by you. What would you tell him about the importance of continuing this process in terms of the money? How important is it to teachers that the legislature follow through now?
It's very important. If, as you know, unless you have the money to live, it's real hard to get very much involved into your job situation. But like, there are so many good things happening out in the classroom, and somewhere along the line, people lost sight of the fact that if you want to have quality education, then there is going to be a price tag attached to it. That is reality. And if we could impart the importance of continuing to improve education in Idaho, but also keeping a realist frame of mind.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to interrupt there. I'm afraid we're out of time.
Okay.
Ms. Roberts and Representative Bateman, thank you for joining us tonight in Pocatello. Superintendent Deedy and Mr. Raleigh, thank you, gentlemen. That's our time for tonight. We'll be back on Monday. I'm Mark Johnson. Good night.
Funding for Idaho Reports is provided by the Friends of 4, 10, and 12, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by a grant from the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation.